afternoon, everyone. My name is Alicia, and I am going to be helping out today. Thank you for joining us for our webinar on training programs for artists and civic transportation collaboration. Today, we're going to go ahead and get started with Ben Stone, and he is going to introduce the presentation today. If you do have any questions, just to go over logistics, you have a chat box on the left-hand side of your screen, and any questions you have during the presentation, make sure to just type that there, and at the end of the presentation, we're going to go ahead and answer those questions. Now I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ben Stone. Ben?
Thank you, Alicia. Hello, everybody. As Lucy just said, I am Ben Stone, Director of Arts and Culture for Transportation for America. And allow me to welcome you to our webinar on training programs for artists and civic transportation collaboration. If you're here for a different webinar, you should still stay. I promise you this will be an exciting topic, even if you were expecting something different. So a little bit about us. Transportation for America is the alliance of elected business and civic leaders from communities across the country united to ensure that states and the federal government invest in smart, locally driven transportation solutions, because these are the investments that hold the key to our future economic prosperity. I can go ahead to the next slide, Alicia. This webinar is the fourth in our series exploring the intersection of arts, culture, and transportation, and it's also part of a larger strategy of programs aimed at promoting the creative potential that lies at this intersection. So why are we focused on this topic today? Because that while artists have become increasingly integrated into civic problem solving, artists and other professionals working in the community development and, of course, the transportation sphere did not necessarily speak the same language, answer to the same stakeholders, or work within the same timelines. Now, there are many new programs that integrate arts and culture work into community development work, like the Artist in Residence programs that we discussed on our last webinar. And as a result, there are related programs springing up that train artists to work with government agencies and community members, and they extend their practice, help them extend their practice beyond the traditional duties of an artist. I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers and quickly get out of the way, since we have three great speakers to fill you all in about some of these programs, speaking from the national and international level, the local level in Nashville, and then, of course, from someone who will talk about her experience in one of these programs. So first, we have Michael Rowe, the Director of the Center for Performance and Civic Practice, speaking about his international experience. We'll next hear from Caroline Vinson, the Director of Public Art for the Metro Nashville Arts Commission, speaking about her experience developing and running the Learning Lab in Nashville. And then finally, we'll hear from our own Mallory Nizam, who is Transportation for America's Arts and Culture Outreach Associate, as well as, rather importantly for this conversation, a graduate of the Community Arts Training Institute in St. Louis. So with that, I will hand things over to Michael.
Thank you, Ben. Hi, everyone. I am indeed the Director of the Center for Performance and Civic Practice, and I'm about to tell you a bit about our work at the intersection of arts and community development. And I'm going to describe the organization a little bit, but I wanted to start by saying so much of our work and so much of the work of partnership across sectors has to do with relationship and discovering and building practices of partnership and collaboration, that it is funny to meet you in the virtual world. But I'm very happy to get a chance to share some of what we're doing, because we believe this work that Ben framed so eloquently is crucial at this moment in our communities. So if I could have the next slide, please. Yes. So the Center for Performance and Civic Practice functions as a national resource for artists and communities working together to develop greater local capacity for arts-based community-led transformation. We are a team of artists and designers. There's 6 of us. We live around the country, but sort of exist as a virtual office. We have a number of initiatives and programs that I'm going to describe to you, but these next couple slides give you a sense of kind of what's at the heart of our work and why I think it's deeply relevant to this conversation today. Next slide, please. We collaborate with communities on creative strategies to problem solve, build intersectional coalitions, and envision inclusive futures. All these images that you're seeing are images from some of our initiatives, some of the artists that we have supported, that we have learned from, that we have documented, that we have mentored and coached. Next slide, please. Our work supports and increases community organizations' ability to imagine and collaborate towards racially equitable and economically just communities. So this work that we are a part of and support and help develop around the country really has kind of these core values at the heart of it, and then our practices and our work of helping build healthy partnerships kind of serve these values, and I'll describe how we do that a bit. If I could have the next slide, please. Something that probably brought you to this call is some knowledge about this, that these days artists, designers, culture makers, culture bearers around the nation are working alongside publics or residents to build healthier, more equitable communities. And we're at such an interesting moment with training programs around the country, with programs like Art Place and Our Town, supporting collaborative work. I think folks in general realize that art is no longer limited to object and event. It can be a tool. It can be a process. And artists are redefining what they can create, how they create, with whom, and for what purposes. Next slide, please. In response to the explosion of interest in and support for collaboration between artists and publics, opportunities for arts-based partnerships in community contexts are increasing. Matter of fact, you might be on this webinar for one of these reasons. If not, in a lot of places around the nation, these are reasons that this work has started to take more and more hold. Funders are developing new initiatives. Community and municipal organizations are building public good, at times place-based projects that embrace the label creative. Arts councils are reimagining what public art can mean, and arts organizations and presenters are seeking and devising projects that engage residents and neighbors and publics in ways that are new to their institutions. And at the heart of this, of course, is a real movement that's been going on for a long time, but that has become visible and sort of validated in various institutionally validated ways in the past decade in particular. The work's not new. Practitioners and communities have been doing it a long time. Folks in civic sector and public organizations have been using creative tactics for a long time, but there is a focus, there is a rising up of potential projects, and with all that comes, we find, a tremendous need to be offering training opportunities, and sometimes we use the word coaching and supporting collaborations, again, around partnership. Next slide, please. So here's some core questions we ask. Next slide. How do artists, community organizations, and government agencies develop cross-sector partnerships, and for what reasons? Next slide, please. How do these partnerships build collaborative practices that balance community-defined needs, change-aimed outcomes, and artistic process and expression? Next slide. What relationship building and translation commitments are necessary for these arts-engaged partnerships to leverage the expertise of all local stakeholders? And hold on this one for a moment. Don't go to the next slide quite yet. This particular image is from a project in Tucson, Arizona that we supported as part of our Catalyst initiative, which I'll describe in a few moments. And this project was local artist Liz Burden in Arizona, working in partnership with Bus Riders Union and several neighborhood coalitions to bring community voices that were often unheard in public decision-making around transportation issues into city planning. And they did that through a variety of arts and culture strategies, including building oases at bus stops around the city in the hottest times of the year, and then finding different ways to listen and then synthesize what they heard and then find different ways to express that and bring it into public stakeholder gatherings and to voices of influence. So that project was particularly interesting because it evolved into a situation where the Public Transit Authority actually wanted to engage with these artists and the stakeholders they were working with and bring what they were doing into a more formal relationship with a public transit, public listening process. Next slide, please. Here's the particular thing that we use when we are out working with municipal agencies, community organizations, and artists. And I should say I've just returned an hour ago from several days in Alaska, where our organization, the Center for Performance and Civic Practice, which I'll call CPCP from now on, we're working with a housing authority in Anchorage that covers 31 counties around the state. And we're working with municipal agencies and artists and Native leaders and Indigenous leaders around public dialogue and issues of equitable housing and public safety. And so this spectrum that I'm about to share with you is something that we share to help community organizations and municipal partners think about the spectrum of art making that they may engage artists in relation to process and intentions. Next slide, please. We talk about studio practice, where what we're all most used to, artists make their own work and engage with neighbors and residents as audience. The next slide, social practice. Social practice, artists work with neighbors and residents on an artist-led vision in ways that may include an intention of social impact beyond a traditional audience experience, but is still based heartily in an artist-led vision. And then this final one, civic practice, next slide, which our organization takes its name from, is when artists co-design a project with neighbors and residents, and the spoken intention is to serve a public partner's self-defined needs. What we have found working with municipal agencies and community organizations on projects in collaboration with artists is the distinction between social practice and civic practice becomes crucial for healthy partnerships in terms of expectations, how process is going to happen, what people's goals are, and how folks who are serving public needs in ways that artists may not necessarily put at the center of a project's starting impulse, how we can collaborate. And so our work is really around helping in communities distinguish between social practice and civic practice, look at how artists can work across this spectrum on community concerns, but also making sure that municipal and community partners are in the process that they want to be in, and that artists have the capacity to be in those processes with them. Next slide, please. We have three core initiatives that sort of bucket our work. Next slide. The first one we call Civic Body, which is basically technical assistance that we offer that embeds effective civic practice into existing non-arts organizations and non-arts systems. A lot of you on the call probably know ArtPlace and LISC. I think some folks from ArtPlace and LISC and the NEA are probably on the phone. Hello, friends and colleagues. Civic Body is what we call the work that we're doing with those entities when their work is sort of making the entry point to this kind of work through the non-arts partner, through a community development corporation, through a transit agency, through a housing authority. So this is one of the spaces where we do our work and commit to helping translation and relationship building and partnership happen effectively. Next slide, please. Catalyst Initiative, technical assistance. That's a misprint, so don't read that. Catalyst Initiative is a program where we support artists and community partner project teams at the real micro level, and we work with individual artists, and we create a cohort of project teams around the country, and we all together go through following each other's projects for a year. We document them, we offer them evaluation that they lead, and then we make all that work visible. If you go to our website, which you'll see at the end of this, we have, I think we're up to 14 beautiful case portraits from the last couple of years of Catalyst Initiative projects, which I think you'd find really interesting in terms of how they describe outcomes and impacts in sectors beyond the arts. This is an image from a project in Richmond that brought an arts organization, an artist, the Richmond Police Department, and legal aid all together to tackle the school-to-prison pipeline in ways that responded to community-defined needs, not just an artist impulse for a project. Next slide, please. Learning Lab, which the next speaker, Caroline, is going to talk about, because this is a partnership between CPCP and Metro Arts, the Arts Council in Nashville, Tennessee. This is working with arts councils to support partnerships with non-arts sectors to help develop a more robust, community-engaged arts ecosystem. Caroline's going to detail that program. It's a program, you see here the first cohort of artists who went through it last year. We're about to move into a second round, and we're also working on scaling it up nationally because we really feel like working with intermediaries like arts councils. Well, I'll say that my friend Jamie Bennett from ArtPlace, who may be on the call, I've heard say several times, as well as others, that one of the first folks that people in transit and other civic sectors in transportation might call is, if they want to work with artists, they might call the Arts Council. And Arts Councils in communities have varying levels of experience with this kind of partnership work. So we are trying to be a resource and an advocate in that sector, in that community of players, to help them offer capacity building for the artists and the non-arts partners in their communities, and again, build a more robust community-engaged arts ecosystem. So these three programs, these initiatives of ours, Civic Body, Catalyst Initiative, and Learning Lab, are how we focus our energy on building capacity within the arts sector and in other sectors like transportation for healthy and effective partnerships. Next slide, please. I'm going to sort of go through these quickly because you will no doubt have access to this presentation, but I'll just note that by listening to partners for the last several decades, we've learned that community partner needs often land in these areas. These are kind of buckets. And of course, areas bleed and overlap, but we found this helpful when working with non-arts partners and artists themselves, that, for instance, the Department of Transportation might be seeking help around advocacy, around dialogue, around story sharing, around civic application, around cross-sector innovation, or around internal or external capacity building. Go to the next slide, please. The work that we do with artists, in addition to helping them think about their own work on this spectrum of studio, social, and civic, is really focused on helping them partner in the kind of cross-sector work we're talking about today. And these are kind of the three lenses that we use with artists. We sort of ask artists to note that most artists hold skills in these three areas: collaboration, design, and expression. But we've tried to sort of articulate definitions for them that aren't limited to how an artist might talk about them, but generally we think makes sense in sectors beyond the arts. The collaboration is turning constituents with varied self-interest into coalitions of stakeholders. And when artists are looked at as partners in processes with that tool towards that goal, it can open up conversation and allow the partnership to develop in effective and really specific ways. Same with design, same with expression. Next slide, please. I'm just about at the end of my 15 minutes, but I wanted to sort of take a final moment and just say that at CPCP, one of the reasons we're committed to this work is we're a group of artists who've been a part of a theater company, Sojourn Theater, for almost 20 years, and all have our own practices firmly in the arts world, but our real central concern and passion is the intersection of arts and this kind of civic and community practice working towards change. And we really believe, as Ben said again so well at the beginning, that the possibilities of creative strategies at this moment of urgent need for coalition building and problem solving is fairly limitless, but we find in our experience that building partnerships, working around translation and co-design, and figuring out how to bring artists and community partners together around engagement and implementation is in itself a huge needed part of the field that we and others, as you're hearing about on this call and other webinars, are really sort of taking as our core mission. So I apologize that I won't be with you for the question period because I have a call with stakeholders in Kansas City through LISC that's been set up for a while. But I'm looking forward to hearing about the second half and virtually responding to questions that you might be chatting about. Thanks for giving me the time to speak, and thank you for your good work.
Great. Thank you, Michael. As Michael just mentioned, we will be collecting questions, so any questions we don't get to today, or if there's specific questions for Michael that he's not able to answer since he has to leave, we will be sure to send those around and get some responses. So feel free to ask questions through the chat box on the left. So next up, we have Caroline Vincent with the Metro Arts Commission in Nashville. So you just take it away, Caroline.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Like they said, I am from Metro Arts in Nashville, Tennessee. We're the city's arts and culture department, so we're part of our city government. We have a Percent for Art public art program, which has traditionally been my role here is managing that. We also have a grant program. We've recently started a microfund program for artists that is called Thrive, which is $4,000, mini sort of funds for artists projects in neighborhoods, so that's kind of related to what we're talking about today too. And then, of course, other community programs and initiatives that we oversee as a local arts agency. You can go to the next slide. So our mission is really to drive a vibrant and equitable community through the arts, and this is what we're focused on right now. We have a theory of change that we're working toward, the goal of everyone in Nashville can participate in a creative life, whether that be through arts programming at their local library, or there's public art in your neighborhood, or you're able to take a class or something like that. So the way we do that is we work on supporting vibrant creative neighborhoods, deeper cultural participation, and also supporting the creative workforce, which I think is one of the reasons we wanted to do the Learning Lab. So you can go to the next slide. So Learning Lab is what we're here to talk about today. I think we found as a local arts agency, as many of you are probably finding, that you want to do this work with artists in the community, or you really want to figure out, how do we bring an artist into our agency, or to work toward an issue. And I think, while most everyone has artists working in their neighborhoods or in their cities, they may not have the tools, or they may not have the language that they might need to work with public or with communities. So we started this process of, investigating how do we create a training program for that. We received funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, so thank you, NEA. We support you. And we sort of started out thinking this was going to be about, public art and placemaking boot camp, but then we really figured out, we needed it to be broader than that. And like Michael said, this is much more about this transformational work, and it's not so much about, plopping public art somewhere, or just creating site-specific public art sculptures, while that, has its place, and we do that as well. And we have done other starter projects in that space for public art, like our signature program has been artist design bike racks, where we have artists submit designs, and then we sort of help them, fabricate their pieces so that, they can kind of learn the public art process, like an apprenticeship. But again, we really wanted to look at how do we bring artists into this space who can work with city agencies, who can work with a civic or community organization in a more transformational way. So we did partner with Michael Road and CPCP and our Arts and Business Council to do that, and we had 25 artists in the first cohort. That was last summer. We, beyond project management basics, we also, really focused on community listening skills and, just things like that weren't necessarily about, like, how do I sign a contract, or how do I do a public art project, even though, we did cover that as well. And just for logistics, we had 4 Saturdays throughout the summer that we had this program. So it was, kind of like an all-day program on once a month from June until early fall. So I can keep talking through this slide. Another thing that we did that I felt was really, really helpful was had about 100 community organizations that we asked to attend a luncheon that, when Michael Road was in town, we said, let's do a lunch and learn with just, organizational partners, civic partners that we're working with, and talk about how they might work with artists. And I think that was one of the most transformational parts of the program, that we had leaders in our community sort of hearing, this is how this works in other cities. These are some projects that have happened that have been successful. And artists are more than just here for, a decorative purpose. Like we know artists can, help with creative problem solving, and they can do a lot more than just create an artwork. So I think that was really helpful, and it also, from our perspective, it was helpful to have an outside expert sort of saying that versus, we've been saying this for years to different various city departments and partners, and I think it just helped to have, an outside person say it. So I think that was a really important part of the training that we kind of tacked on at the last minute, but it really was important, and I think I'm still having people kind of come to me and say, oh yeah, that Learning Lab luncheon I went to was really great, and I really want to work with an artist. So I think, as part of the training, that was really important. And I think we'll probably do more of that in our second round, where we have more of the partners, identified earlier on, and have them, going through the training alongside the artists. So you can go to the next slide. So this is a repeat from, what Michael spoke about, so I won't go in depth, but we did use this framework as our training, kind of the spectrum of artistic work that artists are doing, and I think it really helped us sort of have this shared language to be able to talk about, where are you on the spectrum as an artist, and you may be you may be doing projects that are studio practice. You may be also doing social or civic practice, or you may not be interested in civic practice at all. And I think that was really helpful with artists to sort of identify, what they're interested in doing and have that language to be able to talk about it. We can go to the next slide. So, for the whole training we went through, it was about 4 or 5 months long. We came to the end and we had funding from the NEA and some additional funding that we had to offer money for projects, which was really important, I think, to sort of train artists on how to do this work and then offer funding for them to be able to implement it. So we had this category called relationship and partnership development, which was sort of an artist who might say, I've kind of identified a partner I want to work with, but we don't exactly know what we want to do, or we don't, I don't have a clear sense of how to move forward. So this is sort of a research development phase. And we also earlier in the training had held sort of mock sessions with artists and community partners in what we call listening sessions that Michael's team led, where artists were asked to sit down with a community partner. It could have been, some of them were nonprofits, some of them were, affordable housing advocates or other civic like city departments, like transportation planners, and the artists were paired with them and sort of sat down and just listened to see what are the issues you're facing, what are some of the problems that you're having in your work, and sort of offer not solutions or ideas, but just really sort of practice that active listening, and then think about how they might work with an artist in the future, or how that artist might come back to that and pitch ideas later that could work for that particular agency. And in addition, I forgot to mention that we did also have a session that was just focused on basic project management skills that were things like like I mentioned, like how do you deal with a contract, how do you get insurance, how do you work with a fabricator should you actually be creating an artwork, and things like that. So the next slide talks a little bit about the other categories that we offered, and I think this. Not just to kind of bore you with the details, but this sort of showed the spectrum, and it took us a long time to kind of come to how do we offer funding for projects following this training. And so we sort of followed that spectrum of studio, social, civic, and I think it really helped the artists identify what it is they wanted to do and what type of project were they interested in working on. So that just kind of shows you what we're looking at. And these are 3 to 7 month timelines, $3,000 to $9,500. So not a huge budget, but just enough to kind of have a starter project and develop a larger or deeper partnership with their community partners. And then we also had just a straight studio practice, temporary public art option as well. So we can go to the next slide. So just to talk a little bit about the impact, we have 25 artists go through the training. I think all of them applied for funding except for one artist, and we were able to fund 11 artists for projects. So there was enough funding and impetus for that. So we have artists right now working with affordable housing advocates. We have an artist working with our Kurdish community in Nashville, which is one of the largest populations in the U.S. of Kurdish people, and we also have a theater artist working in our juvenile justice system on a program that's centered on storytelling. Let's see, what else? We also have an artist residency that this Mapping Magruder is part of, an artist who's working in a community resource center that is operated by Catholic Charities. So she's offering art classes, she's done some asset mapping and some documentation of what's in the neighborhood existing and how there can be additional arts programming. We also have an artist now working on building a pottery studio that employs adults with intellectual disabilities. And then we also have a public artwork that is much more tech-based and much more in the temporary public art space. So I think that just kind of shows the spectrum of projects that came out of this. And I think most of these would not have happened for sure without the training and this funding. So I think we're excited to see what comes out of that. We're right in the middle of managing these projects right now. And we can go to the last, I think it's the last slide. So in addition, I wanted to say the other 14 artists who did not receive immediate project funding, we've had several, I think at least 5 or 6 who've facilitated conversations with regional transportation planners. We've had 2 additional artists receive Thrive funding, which is the $4,000 microfund program that we run. We're also in conversation with one artist who is working on potentially a long-term residency with, within our transportation department here in Nashville and with transportation planners. And then another artist just in the last couple of weeks received a $150,000 permanent public art commission through a different process. So I think even though, not everyone received initial funding, we were just really seeing the impact of this language and this training, teaching artists how to speak about their work and how to be in service to community and in service to partners versus, just sort of coming in and saying, I want to do this project and this is my vision and I'm going to make this piece of art. So I think it's been really impactful, and we're still sort of, kind of unraveling what Learning Lab is and what it's going to be in the next iteration. And I just pulled this quote that you're seeing from one of the last sessions. This is Megan Kelly, who does sort of this visual journaling, and she shared this with us. And I just thought this was a really poignant quote that said, as one artist, we are easy to ignore, but as many, we are an unstoppable force for change. And I feel like beyond the training, beyond the projects, beyond any of that, one of the major impacts I felt was just having created this community of artists, of these 25 artists who are now collaborating with one another beyond the Learning Lab. And I think we're just seeing, a lot of community building and that networking amongst that group, which I didn't really expect as we went into this process of having this training program, that we were sort of creating an additional sort of layer of, even if we didn't do the training, even if we didn't fund projects, that we've created a community of artists who weren't working together before but are now. So I think the next slide is just my contact information. If you have questions or want to reach out to us or get more details on how we formatted this training, and then our website, which also has more information.
Great, thank you, Caroline. Last but certainly not least, we will hear from Mallory Nizam, who is both a practicing artist and a member of Transportation for America's Arts and Culture team. And while I am, of course, serving as a moderator today, Mallory actually did double duty, serving as both a speaker and as the organizer for today's webinar. So thank you, Mallory, for pulling this together, and please take it away.
Hi there, I'm Mallory Nizam, and Caroline actually ended on a great transitional note, talking about the impact that these programs have on actually building a community of practitioners that work together and learn together. And I was lucky enough to train in one of these training programs. I'm an alumni of the Community Arts Training Institute, hosted by the Regional Arts Commission in St. Louis, Missouri, which is my hometown. Hope there are some people tuned in from the 314. Hello to you. And I think initially I just kind of want to talk about making the decision to even start in one of these training programs. There may be others out there who kind of felt as artists that they were different from other artists. I sort of felt for a while years ago when I started this practice that I was a kind of a lone wolf, and a lot of other artists that I knew were doing studio practice, but my work was more about community, social issues, the city improving the civic experience. And I was able to find this wonderful community through the Community Arts Training Institute that is training artists who are interested in that intersectional work. So, go to the next slide. Yeah. So the Community Arts Training Institute is 30 years old, so it's been around for a long time. So Metro's starting the work now and has a different perspective, and the CAT Institute, as I'll refer to it now, has been going on for a long time, so we have quite a large community of alumni. And it was founded in '97 on the belief that art has the power to be an agent for positive social change, and specifically that cross-sector collaboration is the key to enhancing that power. It's a 5-month training, and it's sort of gone through different iterations throughout the years, which I'll get into a little bit later. This is sort of a unique training program in that typically, I would say in my class, about half of the participants were artists, only half. So the other half were coming from the social work community, educators, community social activists, policymakers, and we are paired together to kind of train in this cross-sector collaborative way. And our training goes through seminar and lab work. And I think in St. Louis, the CAD Institute has sort of become almost an institution. It's become a name. And one of the impacts that I see at large of the Institute is that it's changing the conversation about what art means to the community there, to St. Louis. And so I see that in the 30 years that CAD has existed, that a lot of the art community in St. Louis has transitioned to really understanding what social or civic practice means, in addition to more traditional studio practice. Next slide. So just an example of the kinds of people that are in my cohort, because I think CAD is interesting in that it's not just artists. So for example, there was a councilwoman, urban planner, pastor, alderperson, people from nonprofit arts world, different types of artists, people in affordable housing. So quite a wide array of participants, which allows for some really interesting learning together. Next slide. So just for example, I want to give a shout out to Leslie Schuler, who's a researcher in St. Louis who did an incredible report on 30 years of the CAT program, and some of this information from my presentation came from her research. And she did a scan of who has participated in the Training Institute. So again, it's not just artists, but it's other cultural workers and social space workers. So we've got, you see about a third of our sector represented is the artistic and creative sector, but we also have a lot of people in community service, social service, lots of social workers, arts administrators, educators, again. So this is just sort of a breakdown so you can kind of see where people are coming from in this particular training program. Here's an example of what our curriculum would look like. So these are topics that were addressed during a recent CAD Institute session. And again, these are the way that these sessions are structured would either be we'll do reading, we've got seminars, we also bring in local speakers and speakers from around the country, in addition to doing lab work where we're actually implementing some of the things that we're learning in the community on the ground. So here you'll see that we've got a lot of very practical knowledge building. I remember going through the Volunteer Lawyers and Accountants for the Arts are a great organization in St. Louis, and they're actually one of the instructors for this course, and they go through things like how to form a contract, how to form a 501c3, bookkeeping, budgeting, risk management, some of these things that you see on the list. But then we're also working on more artistic practice-based things like story sharing, and also questioning the ethics of the work that we're doing and the different techniques of how we're actually engaging communities. So a wide array of curriculum that does span from very practical knowledge and very hard skill-based knowledge to more high-level complicated questions about the ethics of our practice. Also pulling from my own experience as well as the research that Leslie did, I'm going to go through a few different things that I see as the impacts of the Training Institute. So the first impact is common language, and I believe Michael touched on this as well, and I think someone in our Twitter chat has also mentioned the importance of language. And when we were thinking about initiating this topic for a webinar, that was something that came to mind, is how are we creating a dialogue that's cross-sectoral, that allows for multiple practitioners and multiple disciplines to be talking about, because we all are kind of tackling some similar problems, we just have different techniques and different language. So how are we thinking through as a group the ways that we can communicate about the problems that we're all facing, the opportunities that we're seeing? The second impact is a shift to interdisciplinary framing. So if we think about maybe traditional studio art practice, this civic or social practice is different in that we are always thinking about how we can apply our creative skills and creative problem-solving aptitude to real-life problems that civic professionals are facing, transportation professionals in other sectors, so that we can all kind of help to solve the same common goal. So it's a shift out of thinking about the art for art's sake and art as a tool. Impact 3. and Caroline, this is something Caroline mentioned very eloquently, and it's really important for the alumni of the CAT Institute, is this ongoing community of support. And I think it's important to grow the work. I think it's important for sharing best practices. I think it's also important to continue to be engaged as an alumni, as someone who has gone through the training, because the learning, of course, never ends. And I was also given the opportunity to come back to the Institute and serve as a workshop presenter, and other alumni come back as instructors, and then I'll go into another program that kind of grew out of this idea of keeping the ongoing connection of the community. The next impact is work with integrity, and this is really important, and all the other presentations have touched on this. This is really key to the work, is how are we training creative practitioners to continue to question their methods, their ethics, their goals in ways that are truly representative of the communities in which they're working. And there's no clear roadmap for that, but there are some best practices that these trainings offer, and there's a lot of space for dialogue about how we might do the work better. So that was very enriching for me to be able to have those conversations with people in my cohort who come from very different backgrounds, and to be able to have 30 years of alumni who can also talk about that. So speaking of those alumni, that's a really incredible part of this program, and I'm sure other programs, is to be able to really actually create a field and a network of people, because this work is, while both having happened for a long time, is still starting to hit its stride, I think, right about now, maybe the last few years. And that only helps us do the work better when we stay connected. This piece behind the slide and the background kind of faded out is actually a piece that a designer and local artist, D. Nichols, produced at an event to show the literal connections between the alumni here. The string represents those connections. So CAT in 2011 transitioned to experiment with a place-based model, which is really, I think, very interesting. They wanted to really work with practitioners in a specific neighborhood and be able to address issues and techniques that make sense for that area. So I believe there have been 4, maybe more cohorts, and this year they're experimenting with 2, or maybe the last 2 years, experimenting with 2 place neighborhood-based programs simultaneously. So for these programs, the only eligible applicants are people working in that specific community. So that's a different model from the kind of structure where you come for a weekend to a building and everyone's coming from different neighborhoods and you train in that building. This model is the program goes to the neighborhood and is embedded in the institutions there, in the networks there, in the actual challenges and opportunities in that particular place. So it's very specific to each neighborhood. And that's a newer model. There's another sector of CAT that was active for a while, is sort of quiet now, might be coming back. It's the TIGER program. And to clarify, if you're a transportation professional, this is not the Transportation TIGER program. This is specific to the Community Arts Training Institute. And in this training, it allows for, like I mentioned, sort of that ongoing learning from alumni to be able to continue their work after the initial CAT Institute and do deeper research alongside other practitioners on specific projects that they're working on. So sometimes I knew some of these TIGERs, sometimes they're working on, maybe they just launched a nonprofit and they're using this sort of as a space to incubate and really launch in the best possible way, or maybe they've opened a space and they're figuring out how to best work that, and they're able to do it with people that are, it's almost like the graduate school version, if you will, of the program. And just really briefly, I wanted to talk about just some of the sample work coming out of the CAT Institute. Actually, in preparing for this webinar, I spoke with a practitioner named Amanda Cologne-Smith, and she works at the Dutchtown Community Development Corporation in South City, St. Louis. And she mentioned to me that one of the benefits for her of this training program is that as she was working on a traffic calming mural project in Dutchtown, and they specifically printed in professional grade thermoplastic pavement marking so that this will last 6 to 8 times longer than regular traffic paint. So it's quite an endeavor to get this particular material, get it approved, figure out how they can work with the city and streets department to make this project happen. And for her, being able to understand her role as a translator and negotiator beyond just an artist or arts administrator was really helpful. And that knowledge, that translator role knowledge and language came from her training at the Community Arts Training Institute. I'm also involved in a group called Citizen Artists STL that just came about this past year because St. Louis is electing a new mayor, and that's the first time in a long time that we've had that opportunity to bring some new folks into the fray in St. Louis leadership. And this collection is a nonpartisan initiative of artists, organizers, and other creative individuals that are working together to ensure that arts, culture, and the values of these constituents are considered in St. Louis politics and policy making. And it's quite a large group of people participating in that, but of that group of organizers, about 75% of them are CAT Institute alumni who are interested in intersectional work, who are working on continuing to develop those muscles of the language and the role as translator, and very specifically making sure that arts and culture are embedded into the policies of the city of St. Louis. Hopefully more to come on that in the coming years. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mallory. I think we now have about 12 minutes left for questions.
Yes,
Alicia, do you have any questions that came in?
Yes, we do. We have a lot of questions that have come in, but because of time, we're only going to be able to answer a few. The first one is about, maybe half of the questions were about methods of funding. So I know that a few speakers did mention something about the NEA, but other people want to know about other resources.
Well, I think, this is Caroline, I think we did receive initial funding from the NEA through an Our Town grant, I believe it was, for our first learning lab, but then we're going back into our city budget cycle right now and asking for some additional funds to continue the program. So I'm not sure if I know about other external funding sources, but I think given the impact of the program, we definitely have a lot of local support for it and continuing it, so I think that's kind of our strategy right now.
I have a quick follow-up question, Caroline. Have there been anything in particular you've put together in terms of data points to convince the city to expand or to start funding the program beyond the NEA's funding?
We have not. I mean, we have been in conversations with Michael Road actually about sort of an impact, statement or some sort of gathering of data, because we're just starting to see it come in. So I think that's something we're starting to gather right now for our own purposes, because we're just midpoint in the artist projects. So I think that we'll be gathering those data points, but we have, it's more narrative, I guess, conversations now with, council members and sort of advocating for the budget cycle right now. But yeah, we'd love to share that with anyone who's interested after we pull it together over the next few months.
Great.
Another question here is, what types of evaluation/outcome measures seem to be the most valuable in these creative placemaking efforts?
I guess I can speak to that a little bit. I mean, I don't know that we are the we are evaluating. I don't know if I know about, exact models. I think we're looking at, like, Ben mentioned, how are we sort of collecting these data points, but I think we're looking at, the creative workforce, how are we hiring artists, how are we making sure that money flows back into the local economy and are, creating jobs, we're creating opportunities for artists to keep working beyond, our funding. So I think those are some of the things we're looking at as far as evaluation, right now. And I think, like as I said, we're kind of midstream, but yeah.
There is the report that I had mentioned from the Community Arts Training Institute that Leslie Schuler did, and there are some great data points in there. There's some that I'm happy to share as well. But she's also measuring, she's measuring internally, I think, how participants of the program think the program has been impactful, but also looking at where alumni are working and the kinds of sectors that they're collaborating with, and how far that net has been cast and the impact, I think, in terms of partnerships and what kinds of partnerships are being forged between the alumni and practitioners within the city. Yeah.
Wonderful. There's another question. Someone is wanting a recommendation. Is there any way to tie this kind of programming with active living?
I think active living means sort of like healthy design and transportation and things like that. So I think we've done that with several of our projects, and I think you definitely could. I mean, I think this could be expanded to any sort of civic interest area. I mean, I think there's ways of doing that, and artists who are interested in working in all various ways of civic and urban design and infrastructure. And I think we have some other examples that like I mentioned, the bike racks that we've done in that program. But I think it could definitely be tied into that.
Yeah, I think generally anytime you're working in the public sector in any way, so public health, active living, there's so many opportunities for this sort of collaborative work. So I think that would definitely fall under the jurisdiction. And also on Twitter, there was a little bit of a conversation about is it better for artists in this space to be generalists or to be more specifically trained? For example, an artist who specializes in active living or someone who specializes in housing. So that's also a question. There may be artists out there, I'm sure there are, that are particularly passionate about active living, or active living advocates that are interested in working with artists. So the process is sort of cyclical. It's not always that the artists need to reach out, but anyone working in these spaces can also engage artists on their particular areas of interest.
Thank you, Ari. There is a few others. Can you name a couple of resources which might offer good models for rural communities with fewer resources?
That's a great question. I know that ArtPlace does fund some really interesting work in rural communities, so there might be some great case studies through ArtPlace's resources of projects that have been successful in rural communities. I'm not sure if there's specific funding available for those types of places, but that might also be an option. There may be something very specific to those locations.
And I was thinking Springboard for the Arts might be a good resource for some, basic toolkits and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Springboard for the Arts does quite a bit of rural work as well. And then I was going to mention Art of the Rural that does a program called the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange, which is not exactly the same sort of model as the programs we've been discussing today, but it's probably a good resource for information as well.
Perfect. There is a question about how this work how has this work impacted transportation and community engagement if any of you guys have worked in any kind of that capacity with transportation program, transit agencies.
I mean, I think in Nashville we're just beginning that work, and this, the Learning Lab is sort of informing that a little bit, and having artists who are ready and willing to have that conversation. So we're starting to build those partnerships, and I think, there's been a couple of examples of, external entities, not Metro Arts, doing that work along a couple of corridors here in Nashville, and I think it's definitely something we're very interested in. And, we're looking at it from the community engagement perspective, like how can we do community meetings differently, having artists look at that model and give ideas or create new ways of engagement, all the way to, implementing projects, in transportation infrastructure. So I think we're definitely working toward that.
And to piggyback off what Caroline said, we're also working with some communities in Nashville, Portland, and San Diego through a READ grant via the Kresge Foundation. And we're seeing similarly that these tools are being used to kind of change how public meetings work, to be able to source opinions and information from the public and find ways to kind of share how they are using public transportation, how it's working or not working for them, and also thinking about ways to actually create the spaces and functional infrastructure that works for them. So one example could be the work that Conexión Americas has been doing in Nashville with the MPO and also with T4A to create a bilingual crosswalk in a community with a large Latino population. So it's along Nolensville Pike, which is a fairly heavy traffic area that is maybe not the safest place for pedestrians. And they advocated and then designed a crosswalk, and that was relevant to the community and culturally specific. And that came about through some other creative brainstorming processes, engaging artists along the way.
Just mentioned, that question's a good prompt to mention our scenic route website, which is creativeplacemaking.t4america.org, which has a whole host of wonderful examples of this kind of work. And also mentioned that in Nashville, a great kind of supplement to the work that Caroline and Metro Arts are doing is the fact that Nashville MPO has launched a creative placemaking grant program to support artists doing this work with actual funding. So while artists are being trained, there's then money available for them to work with various transportation planners around the Metro Nashville area. And the same thing is just happening now, as announced earlier this week in Portland, Oregon. Metro out in Portland has announced another creative placemaking grant program. So I think those projects, as they start to come online in the next several months or year or so, will have even more good examples of this kind of intersectional work.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, everyone. We are running out of time. I want to go ahead and thank everybody for attending the webinar today. A lot of you have been asking, will we be sharing this webinar with you, the recorded webinar with audio? Yes, we will. And we will also be sharing links to our past two webinars and resources that were talked about during the presentation today. Any last comments from speakers?
Thank you all for tuning in. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.